social media is kind of like a modern day reality, right? I mean, it's just really integral to us in our modern day. And many of us might find that for others on social media, like Facebook, we need a lot of grace, if you will. So I noticed something like that arising for me just about 2 weeks ago when I saw a post on Facebook by a man who's just an acquaintance. He's not someone I really know. But I have 2,200 friends on Facebook and see hundreds and thousands of posts a week. So it was notable that this post stuck with me. And it was a short post, and all it really said was this: good guys always finish last. I read this, and I definitely did not like it, but nor did I comment on it and try to argue with it. But instead, it just sat with me, and I remember just kind of sitting with that question of why was this sticking with me? You know, and how I remember in the past 2 weeks thinking about this individual and wondering about his other posts and wondering about his life and wondering what past life experiences caused him to maybe post this, and whether holding this truth and to what extent he held it was going to dictate his present and his future good, his capacity to receive the fullness of life, if you will. So these are some of the questions that I was pondering. And for those of you, especially who are new to Unity, I wanted to share that foundational to what we believe here in Unity is that what we believe actually delineates and limits our experience. And so we're very mindful of the statements that we tell ourselves, not only in our heads, but that we put out there into the world. And so it was this that caused me to sit and reflect and wonder, was there any hope for this man, right? If he were to think like that, in terms of being open to love and joy and good in his life. Just a question I was sitting with. And as I was sitting with this, something profound happened in my own life that caused me to say yes. Yes, because though we in Unity teach this idea, what we call the law of mind action, thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. We teach that as a spiritual law. While we do, what came up for me was an experience that reminded me that this is not the highest law, that the highest law is not the law of karma per se. It's not tit for tat in how we show up in life, but that the highest law of life is actually the law of grace. That according to Unity, according to what we believe Jesus Christ and other great spiritual teachers taught, it's not merely that we reap what we sow, but we actually reap more good than we sow in our thoughts or our deeds. And it's the beauty of that I want to focus on today. So today I want to share in 3 parts thus. I want to first talk about grace as something that is freely given to us. We say by God, you could say by Spirit, the universe, by love itself. But this idea that grace is not something that is merited by our personal karma, our personal consciousness, but that something that is this urge and pressure, force for good that happens even beyond and above us, that is bigger than us. So I want to talk first about how we receive grace unmerited. And I'll share a personal story and a few other personal stories that would share with me this week by Unity congregants and one Unity minister. So I'll bring in some personal stories there. But so first I want to talk about how we receive grace. Then I want to talk about how, though grace is something that we have no control over, that is freely given to us, that we can help create the conditions for receiving grace by becoming aligned through the law of mind action, becoming aligned with the law of grace, which is ultimately the law of love. So we can become more open and receptive to grace by being the vehicle for God's love and God's grace in this world, by giving grace to others around us. And then finally, I just want to point out that grace comes in many forms, and all we need do is stay open. So first, I want to share a quote by Eric Butterworth, one of my favorite unity ministers of all time. He wrote in this book called Celebrate Yourself, "Grace explains the inadequacy of the idea of karma, the endless cycle of cause and effect. It is true that as you sow, so do you reap. Yet God's desire to express completely through you and as you is so great that you never completely reap the harvest of error, and you always reap more good than you sow. You always reap more good than you personally sow." And so, as I mentioned earlier, I had a very profound experience of it this week. The experience was personal enough that I'm kind of being careful right now of like what pieces of it to share, but it was so profound that I wanted to share it with you today. So basically, I realized that the reason this man's comment was so notable to me is that I had a life story that was kind of the reverse. It wasn't good guys finish last. It's that bad girls aren't lovable. And so if I had done anything wrong, the result of that would be for me to go huddle in a corner because nobody could then love me. I wasn't worthy of love anymore. And if any of you have tried to be perfect and failed, you would know that that'd be a lot of sitting in the corner, right? And so I lived this out for a lot of my life, and I saw how though that story had diminished in its strength, that it was still alive for me, and that I was starting to go back to that feeling of huddling and want to close myself to love and the love around me. But I can tell you that just this week, what happened for me is that through connecting with my husband and with a dear friend, I was able to live a different story. It was a moment in which I felt the least deserving of love. That I experienced what I can only call grace. You know, that moment when you feel like in the Mercy song that you've been a criminal. That moment when you feel like suddenly you're just being let go and you don't quite understand it, but you're going to go with it. You know, it was that kind of moment of release and relief that told me that there was something powerful about love in this world. And that were I to just open more to this love that seemed to be handed to me unconditionally by my husband and by a dear friend, that it was going to be okay, you know? That my life wasn't going to be shattered by this mistake that I had made. And it was a pretty huge mistake. And so today's topic came from this experience. If those of you here have experienced something that feels like grace, when it happens, for me at least, you kind of glow, right? You sit there and the world feels a little bit surreal. And it continued like this for me all week, as if life just had twinkles of stardust all over it. And I remember Friday, I went to see my therapist to try to do the same thing, to be like, look what I did, how horrible. And she's like, stay in the grace and the love and how beautiful. And she's like, sit with that. I'm like, whoa, okay. So I did. And I left my counseling appointment, and a close friend of mine was going through some big stuff. So I was about to go into Trader Joe's, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to buy some orchids. And maybe she likes orchids, so I'm going to buy her some flowers and bring it over to her, something I wouldn't usually do. So I remember, I just felt like I was floating, in Trader Joe's. I was like, oh, these are beautiful, and I'm going to buy these for myself, and I'm going to buy these for my friend. And then I kind of floated around, just smiled at everyone. And then I get to the cashier, and the cashier was so friendly and warm. And I just remember feeling like the whole world was so happy and warm. And then the person who bags your stuff came over and was like, how are you doing? I was like, I'm doing okay, but I'm about to go help a friend and go bring her some flowers because she's not feeling well. And he's like, really? Well, can we send some more flowers along with you? And so the two guys started collaborating, and they were like, okay. And so they were like, wait. And they went and bought another bunch of flowers and brought it back. But, these flowers came over, and I'm like, oh, my friend's not going to like these flowers. But then I get a text from my husband. My mother-in-law has just come home from having a lumpectomy, right? And she's beginning to heal. And I look at the flowers, I'm like, these are all yellow. And my mother-in-law lives 5 minutes from this Trader Joe's in Overland Park. I'm like, these flowers are for her. And it just so happened that my husband texted me at this time, so there I go. And I'm carrying bunches of flowers out just Trader Joe's. And seriously, a woman passes by and says, oh my gosh, those are beautiful flowers. I'm like, I know, thank you. And then I get out to my car and I unload everything, and a man comes by and says, may I take your cart back for you? I said, well, thank you. It was one of those magical days. And I realized that, I could have gone to Trader Joe's with a very different attitude. But just being open to sort of that glow of life made me open to these things, right? And attract people who are like that. And so that's my mini story about grace and how grace multiplies. Thus, my title for today, Grace Upon Grace. And now I want to share with you a story by one of us here, a Unity congregant, not deliberately anonymous, so you might even recognize her in this description. But I wanted to share it myself rather than have individuals come here, because I really want you to feel not only the story as being true for her, but being possible for you. And so this is a story of grace that was shared with me earlier this week by someone right here in this room. On the topic of receiving grace, she says, I was stuck in a job that looked great on paper and that everyone thought was the coolest job ever. I got to produce and make TV shows. I got to travel to LA and Vegas and Chicago and have an expense account and do really cool sounding gigs. My boss loved me, and we were as close as family. But the truth was, I was miserable. I felt empty, hollow, exhausted. I'd leave work every day and cry because I felt so hopeless. And on top of that, I felt shame for not being content with such an amazing job according to other people's or societal's material standards. And then, as the primary breadwinner in my marriage, I also didn't really feel like I had a choice as to whether to quit what was such a well-paying job in order to pursue just my personal passion, to become, of all things, a therapist. So, with at least some spiritual faith at that time, I did take a mini leap. I applied to graduate school and was accepted. But then rather than being thrilled, I was even more distraught because now I had the perfect opportunity in front of me, but I could see no way to financially swing what I so desperately wanted to do. So I decided to take another baby leap and at least meet with a financial officer, right, to find out about things and to find out what options I might have. In the background, I knew I had a poor credit score, past financial decisions that were not the best ones, and a general lack of money management as my historic background. And so it felt like my dream to become a therapist was absolutely impossible. On the day of the meeting, it was pouring rain. I arrived late and soaking wet from having gotten lost wandering around the college campus. I was discouraged and weary. I sat down with the counselor, only to hear these words. So, looking at your life, or your file, I mean, you're in trouble. Looking at your file, I see that you have been awarded $20,000 in aid. What? I thought there must be some mistake. I asked the girl what she was talking about. She smiled and told me that in the course of filling out the bazillion forms I had to fill out to apply, I, unbeknownst to me, applied for and then received a $20,000 financial aid award. 2 months later, I was enrolled and sitting in my first class, which changed the trajectory of my entire career in life. And then, of course, it was in leading relationship skills workshops that I first came to Unity in June of this year, which Unity, that is, has supported me during a summer when I've been going through a divorce after 16 years of marriage, and I really needed spiritual nourishment and community. So it was perfect timing, the perfect career, and grace upon grace. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity movement, wrote this in his book, Keep a True Lent. God, as the creative principle of the universe, will always meet us more than halfway. By becoming receptive to the grace of God, we receive the measure of God's provision, which exceeds any of our imaginings. Charles Fillmore. So now, while the teaching is that grace is freely given, we might not always be so receptive to it or aligned with it in a way that we embrace it in our lives. Our capacity to receive divine grace is enhanced, however, when we are willing to align with the root of grace, which is divine love. And so the more we are willing to love, the more we are loved. The more unconditionally we love, the more we're inclined to forgive and release judgment, the more the universe is inclined to respond in kind. And I'm going to share a story from another Unite congregant who's not here today. She's okay with her name being known, but I'm just going to omit it for now. So, this story of grace and forgiveness. I fell in love with a married/separated pastor whose wife had cheated on him for 3 years while he knew, and for 3 years he asked her, just stop and come back to me. She didn't, she left, he fell in love with me. And then she says, truer, deeper friendship and devotion than either of us have ever felt was experienced. Then she found out. She caused HE double hockey sticks. She threatened his job with the church and called him an adulterer because he was technically still married. They went to counseling. She said that she had changed. She loved him. She said she was coming back. He took her back. He ended it with me in an email. I was crushed. I was angry. I was destroyed emotionally at first. And then, through God's grace, I healed. They healed. We healed. We smiled. We talked. We gave each other, all three of us, she says, we gave each other a ton of grace. He was living out the grace he felt God was asking him to give her. She felt the light of the grace of God's love pouring over her through her own personal return to God, and then through the acceptance of her husband's love that he offered. Then I felt divine grace, that I was still enough, even after what was the most excruciating rejection that I had ever felt. I felt that I was enough. God loved me. Nothing could change that. In my deepest sorrow is where I felt held by a power greater than myself. With nothing left but confusion, questions, and even panic, I cried myself to sleep for a few days, but eventually realized I did not die, that there must be more in store for me. And she goes on to say, what more was in store? Well, because of the space made by the leaving of this relationship, I met and got to know the man who is now my husband. And then, this past spring, I led a retreat with that pastor's wife, a spiritual retreat. That is healing. And so for me, she says, the story is the ultimate testament to faith, openness, and that within the darkest pain, one can bear the greatest light of all. And so she had a deeper and truer knowing that everything can be healed. But that leads to my final point, which is that healing comes in many forms. The final story I want to share about grace is a shorter one. It comes from a Unity minister I know who is a former classmate of mine in seminary. She tells this story. I decided I was ready to adopt a cat. I went to the shelter and asked to see adult cats who had been declawed, as that was a requirement from my landlord. The first one that my husband and I, came to was this beautiful all-gray cat named Grace. We instantly clicked. And then the volunteer said to me, oh, wait, Grace is actually a male. So what do you think you might name him? And I replied, I think I'll stick with Grace. After all, grace comes in many forms. And by the way, as a pitch for coming to church, I want to add that Grace's name came from the fact that this cute little kitty was found behind a church, and hence the name, Grace. So I just want to close our time together and open into a time of meditation where I'll guide us into a meditation on grace by simply reminding us that, yes, it's true that through the law of mind action, that in general, it's important to be aware of our thoughts, our words, what we post on Facebook, what we declare about our lives, the stories that we tell ourselves. It's important because that can, to a great extent, limit or delineate our capacity to receive the fullness of grace and love that is always available for all of us equally, no matter what we have done or been or said in the past. That opening is available to us here now. But it is also true that we need not simply be passive recipients of this grace, that we can do work through choosing to give grace to the people in our lives, to the people that we work with, to the people that we hold in consciousness, who might not even be in our lives today, but who were in our lives in the past, whom we hold a grudge against, whom we have failed to forgive, whom we have failed to become a vehicle for God's grace for. When we exercise that, we become recipients of that infinite supply of good that is our entitlement as children, or expressions of that one infinite Spirit of God. And all we need do is keep our heart open to both give and receive that grace. So with that, I'm going to take us into meditation directly, and then Victor, you'll bring us out with By Thy Grace. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And I'll invite you to close your eyes now and take a deep breath and find yourself here now in this present moment of your life. Become aware, what is it that I believe about myself here today that might be like this one guy's belief, like Reverend Nhien's belief, that might limit me from my capacity to fully receive the abundance of grace that is mine. Take a moment to allow whatever story or tape you tell yourself that you think limits your capacity to receive good. And with that in mind, allow yourself to open to the possibility that that limiting belief is simply not true. That infinite Spirit only seeks to give and give in abundance to you. That what you need for your highest calling in this life is poured forth for you. Allow your mind and your heart to be open to that divine dispensation of love, of good, of prosperity. Let it wash over you. Let it be that which your eyes see in everyone and everything outside you, that everything and everyone is here for your good, for your highest good. And as you also allow your personal story to be released, if only for a bit, if only for this moment, I invite you to bring to mind a story you have about someone else in which you would hope to limit their good. Allow yourself to let that belief, if not let it go permanently, just set it on the shelf for now. Maybe it's not true. Maybe divine love is so magnificent. Allow yourself in this moment, to the extent you can, to send forth divine love to this person. To become the vehicle, the wellspring of divine grace in this person's life. Allow that love to flow from your hearts and out toward this person in endless, boundless streams. And now, sitting here as open and receptive as you possibly can be in this now moment. Allow yourself to feel that in one moment you both give and receive divine love, divine grace, maximally. Allow yourself to feel how the truth of you actually is this love and this grace. And allow yourself to feel that sense of peace, lightness, and abundance here now in the silence.